In the corridors of power, there exists a curious law that most people never learn until it's too late. The closer you get to someone, the less they fear you. The more available you become, the less valuable you seem. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago, yet we still ignore it, wondering why intimacy breeds contempt and why constant presence dilutes influence. Why is it that the moment we make ourselves too known, too accessible, too understood, we lose the very thing we sought to gain? Look around you. We live in an age of radical transparency. Social media has convinced us that connection requires constant visibility. We document every meal, every thought, every fleeting emotion. We respond to messages within minutes as if silence were a sin. We explain ourselves endlessly, justifying our choices to strangers and friends alike. The modern world whispers a dangerous lie into our ears. That closeness is always good, that availability equals care, that mystery is manipulation. But what if the opposite is true? What if the path to genuine power, to lasting respect, to the kind of influence that survives the test of time, requires something most people are unwilling to give? What if it requires distance? That's where our story begins. Not in the cold halls of Renaissance palaces, but in the quiet moment when you realize that everyone who got too close to you eventually stopped respecting you. That text you sent explaining yourself for the 10th time. That relationship where you became so available that you became invisible. That job where your constant presence made you forgettable rather than essential. The war between intimacy and influence has been raging since humans first gathered in groups, and most of us are losing it without even knowing we're fighting. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513, not as a manual for tyrants, but as a surgical examination of how power actually works. His brilliance wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. He saw what comfort hides, what polite society refuses to acknowledge. He understood that people respect what they cannot fully grasp, what remains slightly out of reach, what maintains an element of mystery. In chapter 19, he writes about the importance of avoiding contempt and hatred, but buried within his observations is a deeper truth. Familiarity doesn't breed trust. It breeds carelessness. The prince who dines with his soldiers every night becomes just another man. The leader who explains every decision loses the aura of certainty. The person who is always there, always available, always accessible, becomes part of the furniture. We think we're building connection, but we're actually dismantling the very foundation of respect. Distance isn't coldness, it's architecture. It's the space between notes that makes music instead of noise. But we resist this truth because it feels wrong. We've been taught that love means constant presence, that friendship requires immediate availability, that leadership demands transparency. We confuse intimacy with invasion, presence with pressure. We think that closing the gap between ourselves and others will make us more valued, more loved, more powerful. So we open up completely. We share everything. We make ourselves endlessly available. And then we wonder why people stop calling, stop caring, stop seeing us as anything special. This is the paradox Machiavelli identified. The same proximity that creates affection also creates contempt. The same openness that builds initial connection eventually erodes respect. The same availability that feels like generosity slowly transforms into expectation, then into entitlement, and finally into indifference. We become so known that we become unknowable in a different way. We become so present that we become absent from people's thoughts. They stop wondering about us because there's nothing left to wonder about. Consider the friend who always says yes. The one who rearranges their entire schedule at a moment's notice. The one who responds to texts within seconds, who is always free, always willing, always there. At first, this feels like devotion. But over time, something shifts. Their availability becomes expected. Their presence becomes assumed. Their yes loses its value because it's guaranteed. They wanted to be essential, but they became optional. They wanted to be chosen, but they became the default. The very thing they thought would make them indispensable made them disposable. This isn't about manipulation. It's about human nature. We assign value based on scarcity. We respect what we cannot take for granted. We think about what remains slightly beyond our complete understanding. When someone is always explainable, always predictable, always fully visible, our minds stop engaging with them. There's no mystery to solve, no depth to discover, no space to project our own meaning. They become a known quantity, and known quantities don't captivate us. They don't haunt our thoughts or stir our imaginations. Machiavelli watched this dynamic play out in the courts of Italy. He saw leaders who tried to be loved by being close to their people, only to be overthrown when that closeness bred contempt. He saw generals who drank with their troops become unable to command those same troops in battle. He saw advisors who made themselves too available lose their counsel's weight because it became too common, too easily accessed, too cheap in its abundance. Let's descend deeper into why this happens. Why does closeness so often lead to contempt? Why does familiarity erode the very respect we're trying to build? The answer lies not in Machiavelli's time, but in ours. In the depths of our own psychology, in the mechanisms Carl Jung identified when he explored the shadow self. Every time you explain yourself excessively, every time you make yourself completely available, every time you remove all mystery from your presence, something happens beneath the surface. You're not just being open. You're seeking permission. You're asking for validation. You're demonstrating that you need their approval to exist as you are. And the shadow, that part of you that you've learned to hide from the world, that part that craves power and respect and autonomy, gets pushed down further. Jung understood that we all wear masks, what he called the persona. It's the face we show the world, the version of ourselves we think others will accept. But beneath that mask lives the shadow, containing all the qualities we've deemed unacceptable. Ambition, anger, the desire for control, the need to be seen as powerful rather than nice. When we over-explain, when we make ourselves too available, when we sacrifice distance for desperate connection, we're usually operating from the persona, trying to be the good person, the available friend, the understanding partner. Meanwhile, the shadow starves, and that starvation manifests as resentment, exhaustion, and a gnawing sense that something is fundamentally wrong. Think about the last time you bent over backward for someone who barely acknowledged it. The colleague you stayed late to help, who never thanked you and now expects it. The friend you canceled plans for repeatedly, who gets annoyed the one time you're busy. The relationship where you were always the one reaching out, always the one making effort, always the one sacrificing. You thought you were building connection, but what you were actually doing was training them to devalue you. This is the emotional cost of ignoring Machiavelli's law. You become exhausted from constant availability. You grow resentful because your efforts aren't reciprocated. You feel invisible despite being more present than anyone else. And beneath it all, your shadow grows hungrier, whispering truths you don't want to hear. That you're not actually being kind, you're being afraid. That you're not actually being generous, you're being desperate. That you're not actually connecting, you're performing connection while dying inside from loneliness. The mechanism runs deeper than personal relationships. Society itself rewards conformity and punishes silence. We live in a world that demands you explain yourself, justify your choices, make your process visible. The student who doesn't participate gets marked down, regardless of whether they understood the material. The employee who works efficiently in silence gets overlooked for promotion compared to the one who makes sure everyone sees them working. The person who maintains boundaries gets labeled as cold, difficult, or antisocial. This is what Nietzsche called herd mentality. The mass of humanity wants everyone to be equally visible, equally accessible, equally explainable. Because the person who maintains distance, who holds something back, who operates from a place of self-contained certainty, reminds everyone else of what they've sacrificed. They remind the herd that another way of being is possible, and the herd hates nothing more than being reminded of the prison it's built for itself. Your persona, that mask you wear, thrives in the herd. It knows how to perform availability, how to signal openness, how to seem like everyone else. But your shadow, that part of you that hungers for genuine power and authentic respect, suffocates in the crowd. It knows that real influence doesn't come from explaining yourself to everyone. It comes from being selective about who gets access to the depths of who you are. Every time you justify yourself to someone who hasn't earned that justification, a part of your fire dims. Every time you make yourself available to someone who treats your time as worthless, you teach them that it is. Every time you remove all mystery from your presence, you remove all reason for people to think deeply about you. You become simple in their minds, easy to understand, easy to predict, easy to dismiss. But here's what most people miss. The cost isn't just external. It's not just that others lose respect for you. The deeper cost is internal. You lose respect for yourself. Because on some level, you know you're betraying your own value. You know you're performing a version of yourself that isn't real in exchange for scraps of validation. You know you're accessible not because you're generous, but because you're terrified of what happens if you're not. This is where the shadow's wisdom becomes essential. The shadow contains your survival instincts, your drive for self-preservation, your understanding that not everyone deserves access to you. When you constantly override these instincts in the name of being good or nice or available, you're not transcending your shadow. You're repressing it, and repressed shadows don't disappear. They fester. They leak out in passive aggression, in burnout, in sudden explosions of rage that seem disproportionate because they're carrying months or years of unacknowledged truth. Power begins when you stop explaining. Not because explanation is always wrong, but because constant explanation signals that you need permission to be who you are. It signals that your choices are up for debate, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your presence is conditional on others' approval. Real power, the kind that lasts, the kind that commands genuine respect rather than performative politeness, comes from a different place. It comes from the integration of shadow and persona, from the willingness to be misunderstood, from the courage to maintain distance even when everything in you screams to close the gap. Now we arrive at the heart of Machiavelli's insight, the law itself stripped of romance and revealed in its stark necessity. In chapter 23 of The Prince, Machiavelli writes, "Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived." But the deeper principle embedded in his work is this: a prince must be seen, but never fully known. He must be present, but never completely available. He must inspire both love and a degree of fear, which is impossible if he makes himself common through excessive proximity. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding the architecture of respect. When you maintain distance, you create space for imagination. People fill that space with their own projections, their own meanings, their own elevated version of who you are. When you close that distance completely, you collapse the space where their imagination lives. You become only what they can see, which is always less impressive than what they could imagine. Consider how this played out in history. Caesar understood it. He didn't celebrate every victory with his soldiers in extended revelry. He appeared, he inspired, he vanished, leaving them to speak of him in his absence. Queen Elizabeth I understood it. She remained unmarried not just for political reasons, but because marriage would have made her ordinary, tied her to one person, collapsed the mystery of her sovereignty into the domestic simplicity of being someone's wife. The moment she became fully known in that way, she would have lost the element that made her exceptional in the minds of her subjects. The Stoics practiced this too, though they framed it differently. Epictetus taught that we should concern ourselves only with what's within our control, which naturally creates distance from the judgments and demands of others. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations not for publication, but for himself, maintaining an inner sanctum that remained private even while he ruled an empire. They understood that preserving some part of yourself that the world cannot access isn't selfishness. It's sovereignty. But here's where people misunderstand Machiavelli and mistake his wisdom for coldness. They think maintaining distance means being unfeeling, unavailable, or cruel. They confuse strategic restraint with emotional withdrawal. The distinction is crucial. Strategic distance means being selective about who gets full access to you. It means not explaining yourself to everyone. It means allowing some mystery to remain in your presentation. It means understanding that your presence should feel like a gift rather than a guarantee. This is not the same as manipulation. Manipulation is creating false impressions to exploit others. Distance is maintaining authentic boundaries to preserve your own sovereignty and, paradoxically, to create the conditions for genuine connection. When you're not available to everyone all the time, the moments when you are available become meaningful. When you don't explain yourself to everyone, the people you do open up to feel honored by that trust. When you maintain some mystery, people pay attention when you reveal something true. The moral tension here is real. We're taught that good people are open, that healthy relationships require complete transparency, that any form of withholding is a form of lying. But this confuses truth with total disclosure. You can be honest without explaining every thought. You can be trustworthy without being available every moment. You can be genuine while still maintaining boundaries about who gets access to which parts of you. Think of it this way. A temple is sacred partly because you can't walk through it the same way you walk through a shopping mall. Sacred spaces have thresholds, requirements for entry, places that remain restricted even to believers. This doesn't make them fake or manipulative. It makes them sacred. Your inner world, your time, your energy, your presence, these are sacred too. And treating them as such, protecting them with appropriate distance, doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. The rulers Machiavelli studied understood this. They knew that a king who jokes with his servants at breakfast will struggle to command them in battle. Not because the servants are fickle, but because familiarity has dissolved the psychological architecture that allows one person to lead and others to follow. Leadership requires a certain remove, not cruelty, but clarity about roles and boundaries. The moment those boundaries collapse completely, so does the ability to lead. This applies beyond formal leadership. It applies to any relationship where respect and influence matter. The parent who tries to be their child's best friend often loses the ability to be their parent when discipline is needed. The therapist who shares too much of their own struggles with their patient stops being able to hold space for the patient's healing. The mentor who becomes too casual with their mentee loses the gravitas that made their advice powerful in the first place. But, and this is essential, maintaining distance doesn't mean maintaining coldness. The best leaders, the most influential people, the ones who command genuine respect rather than fearful compliance, they understand warmth within boundaries. They're not distant because they're heartless. They're strategically available because they understand human nature. When they do show up, they're fully present. When they do speak, Their words carry weight. When they do reveal themselves, it matters because it's rare. Machiavelli's law of distance is actually an act of respect. It respects the human tendency to devalue what's always available. It respects the need for mystery and imagination in relationships. It respects your own worth by not throwing your presence and explanation at everyone who demands it. And it respects others by allowing them the space to project meaning, to wonder, to engage their own minds rather than having everything spelled out for them. The emotional crescendo of this law is this: you are not obligated to make yourself small so others feel comfortable. You are not required to explain your choices to people who haven't earned that intimacy. You are not meant to be an open book that anyone can flip through at their convenience. Your depth, your complexity, your inner world, these are treasures that deserve protection. And protecting them through strategic distance isn't selfishness or manipulation. It's self-respect. It's the recognition that your presence is valuable precisely because it isn't guaranteed. Your words matter because you don't waste them on empty explanation. And your connection means something because you don't offer it indiscriminately to everyone who asks. So where does this leave you? Standing in your life, realizing perhaps for the first time that you've been too available, too explainable, too present. That you've confused intimacy with invasion and generosity with self-abandonment. The question now isn't whether Machiavelli was right. The question is what you do with this understanding. This is where Jung's shadow work becomes essential. That resentment you feel when people take you for granted, that's your shadow speaking. That exhaustion from being always available, that's your shadow trying to protect you. That quiet voice that whispers you deserve better treatment, that's not selfishness. That's the part of you that knows your worth, the part you've been pushing down every time you over-explain, every time you sacrifice your boundaries, every time you make yourself smaller to accommodate others. Integrating your shadow doesn't mean becoming cruel. It means acknowledging that you have needs, boundaries, and limits. It means recognizing that the part of you that wants respect isn't evil, it's essential. Every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't deserve that explanation, you're not being kind to them. You're being cruel to yourself. You're telling your shadow that its instincts for self-preservation don't matter, that your worth is negotiable, that your presence is something to be given away freely rather than offered selectively. Think of it as a fire. When you're constantly available and endlessly explaining, you're throwing your fuel everywhere. You're burning hot and bright for everyone, and wondering why you feel cold inside. The shadow's wisdom is this: bank your fire. Let it burn strong and steady in your core. Share its warmth selectively, with people who honor what they're receiving. Let others see the glow, feel drawn to it, but don't burn yourself out trying to keep everyone warm. This is where Nietzsche's voice enters, fierce and clarifying. He wrote about the will to power, which most people misunderstand as a drive to dominate others. But what Nietzsche really meant was the will to power over yourself. The will to overcome your own weaknesses, your own need for approval, your own addiction to being liked by everyone. The will to become who you actually are rather than who others want you to be. The person who maintains distance isn't trying to control others. They're trying to stop being controlled by others' expectations. They're claiming sovereignty over their own time, their own presence, their own inner world. This is the true will to power. Not power over the crowd, but freedom from the crowd's demands. Not influence through force, but influence through self-possession. Nietzsche also spoke of the outsider, the one who walks alone before they rise. The person who begins practicing distance will feel this loneliness. Your friends might call you distant. Your family might say you've changed. People who benefited from your over-availability will resist your new boundaries. They'll call it selfishness when you stop being endlessly accessible. They'll call it coldness when you stop over-explaining. They'll accuse you of thinking you're better than them when you start valuing your own time and presence. Let them. This is the loneliness before you rise. This is the cost of refusing to be ordinary, of rejecting the herd's demand that everyone be equally small, equally available, equally explainable. The transformation from people pleaser to self-possessed individual requires walking through this fire. Most people turn back. They can't stand being misunderstood. They can't handle others' disappointment. So they collapse back into over-availability, into endless explanation, into the comfortable prison of being everyone's doormat. But you're reading this because some part of you is done with that. Some part of you is ready to integrate your shadow, to honor your need for boundaries, to stop betraying yourself for scraps of approval. The transformation begins the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who haven't earned that explanation. Not rudely, not cruelly, simply by recognizing that your inner world is not public property. It continues when you start valuing your time the way you'd value money. You wouldn't hand out $100 bills to everyone who asked. Why hand out hours of your life? It deepens when you realize that the people who truly respect you won't demand constant access. They'll appreciate the access they have because they understand it's a choice you're making, not an obligation you're fulfilling. The rebirth comes slowly, then suddenly. You notice people treating you differently. Not because you've been manipulative or cold, but because you've stopped being desperate. Your presence carries weight because it's not guaranteed. Your words matter because you don't waste them. Your time feels valuable because you treat it as valuable. And paradoxically, you become more connected to others, not less. Because the connections you maintain are real. They're based on mutual respect rather than your one-sided over-functioning. You stop explaining not because you're cold, but because you've learned that silence is the language of the strong. You maintain distance not because you're heartless, but because you understand that respect requires space. You protect your inner world not because you're hiding, but because you've finally recognized that what's sacred needs protecting. This is the wisdom Machiavelli tried to teach 5 centuries ago, the truth Jung tried to illuminate about the shadow, the freedom Nietzsche tried to inspire through his philosophy of self-overcoming. They're all saying the same thing in different languages. Your value doesn't come from being available to everyone. It comes from being true to yourself. And being true to yourself requires distance from those who would diminish you, boundaries with those who would exploit you, and the courage to let others misunderstand you rather than explaining yourself into invisibility. The practical reflection is simple but difficult. Next time someone questions your motives or demands your time or asks you to justify your choices, pause before responding. Let silence carry your truth. Not hostile silence, but calm, self-possessed silence. The silence that says, I don't owe you an explanation. I'm not being cruel. I'm simply not available in the way you're demanding. Watch what happens. Some people will respect you more immediately. Others will get angry, which tells you everything you need to know about how they viewed you, as a resource to be used rather than a person to be respected. Machiavelli's wisdom was never about cruelty. It was about conserving energy, about understanding human nature, about recognizing that the path to genuine influence runs through self-respect. The law of distance isn't a trick to manipulate others. It's a truth about how value is perceived and how respect is earned. It's the recognition that mystery isn't deception, boundaries aren't rejection, and self-possession isn't selfishness. The world will always demand explanations. It will always pressure you to be more available, more accessible, more explainable. It will call you cold for having boundaries and selfish for protecting your time. But the wise understand something the crowd never will. Power doesn't explain. It simply is. Respect doesn't come from constant availability. It comes from selective presence. And genuine connection doesn't require you to dissolve all distance. It requires you to choose carefully who gets to cross the distance you maintain. If you're drawn to ideas like this, if they resonate with something deep inside you that's been starving for permission to value yourself, then subscribe and keep walking this path. Not everyone will understand, not everyone will approve, but the ones who matter will respect you for it. And more importantly, you'll finally start respecting yourself.